Welcome to another episode of Nacoa's Lunchtime Lives, a series of live interviews that go out across one of our social media platforms where I speak to people that have advocated for Nacoa and COAs alike. And in this episode, I'm delighted to welcome Caroline Flint. Now, Caroline Flint has spearheaded the all-party parliamentary group along with Liam Byrne and Jonathan Ashworth and some of the other people that we've already spoken to in helping to raise awareness and get people to look at the issue that children of alcoholics face. And Caroline has been instrumental in raising awareness for Nacoa and the work that we're able to do. She's a Mastermind winner in which she raised money for Nacoa as well. We talk about that, we look at the trophy. And Caroline talks us through her life experiences of growing up with her mum who eventually had a problem with alcohol and what that meant to her. And Caroline's journey as an adult and an MP to really owning her story. And I think that's what I certainly took from this interview, was really how Caroline has been able to own her story in the way that she has. If this is the first time that you've ever been here, please make sure that you have subscribed and turned on the notifications so you know each and every time that we post a new video. Sit back and enjoy this interview, and I hope you take as much from it as I did.
I hope if people are, watching and listening, they'll get in touch if they've got any questions or what have you during the course of the program, because I think you like a bit of interaction, don't you, Josh?
We do try and get the interaction going if we can, yeah.
Okay. And I know also that, that sometimes when I've, done this sort of thing and had these conversations, people have contacted me afterwards. So again, as long as I can cope, please, if you want to get in touch or ask a question, you can go through Nacoa and I can sort of work with them and, try and give some answers. Because one of the things about myself, Josh, and certainly I think since, some time ago now that I started talking about my own experience as a child of an alcoholic, one of the things that has been really thought-provoking for me and continues to be is hearing from people who've gone through it's not the same for everybody, but a similar experience. And in some ways, all these conversations help people, I hope, to talk. I don't think it's easy. Even now, all these years later, I sometimes even find now that it's both an empowering aspect to talk about these things, but also it still brings a lot of emotion with it. And I just, for anybody watching, I do get that, and I think you do as well, Josh. It's it is a bittersweet often experience you go through, but I just think that for me, some years ago, when I started talking about this, and we'll get into it later about how that happened maybe, it allowed me to reflect more strongly, I suppose, on my own experience and what happened, but also realizing how when it comes to alcohol, often it isn't talked about as much as drugs, conventional drugs, that an addiction through that. And even today, when we look at services, there has been progress. The fact that Nacoa is here is a sign of that. But the truth is that it's still something that people don't talk about much, and certainly children don't talk about. But I also know from the number of people who've been in contact with me over the years that, like myself, it's something you take through into adulthood. And we all know that for some people, that has been incredibly hard to bear. And it's had an enormous negative impact on their lives as well. And I think recognizing that is why we all keep going, is why we all, Nacoa is still here, while you devote so much of your time to addressing these issues. And I hope myself in a small way, and many other people in different types of jobs and parts of our life, in the public, in the private sector, or wherever it is, that sharing our experience goes some way to others who maybe don't feel that they can talk about it and still won't be able to talk about it, but at least they know that there are others like them who've been through a similar experience. So yeah, it's good. It's good.
Yeah, and I think it's a really important point that you raise as well. And I think we've probably talked about it in the past, which is this whole, for some people, it isn't, they're not able necessarily to be able to talk about it in the ways that we've been able to. And I think that's what makes what, you and people like yourself do so much more important, right? I think the first time I met you was a few years ago at the House of Commons when we did the David Stafford Memorial Lecture. Was that the first time we ever met, right?
I think it probably was, actually, and I think you were speaking at that event, weren't you, as well? And that goes back to the, you know, was establishing the sort of all-party group for children of alcoholics. And it's a weird situation in Parliament because there's hundreds of all-party groups, and there are a number of different groups that are centred around addressing alcohol abuse and its impact. And likewise, there's lots of all-party groups that in different ways are there to speak up for children in whatever. In fact, when I first came into Parliament, I established the first all-party group on childcare, because it was something I was involved with in the charity sector before I became an MP. And again, interesting, I remember at the time saying there's an all-party caravan group and there's an all-party beer group, but there isn't an all-party childcare group. But there wasn't one that actually really wanted to focus on children and their experience of living in an environment where parents or other family members, alcoholism was having, you know, this huge impact on their lives. And I think actually, given that, you know, it's still pretty much quite a young all-party group, it really struck a chord with lots of people, both inside and outside Parliament, that if we don't address how children are affected by addiction, and in particular, we're obviously talking about alcoholism, then we're not going to really deal. You can't deal with a person who's an alcoholic and not understand the everyday impact on their on the lives of the people that they live with. But also not just about hearing children's voices when they're going through that experience, but recognizing that those children become adults, but often they're trapped in what happened to them as children, which is very hard for them to shake off or deal with, and can have an ongoing impact in their own families and beyond. So we are the the all-party group for children of alcoholics, but actually it's that weird situation, isn't it? Because we're talking about children, but we're talking about adults who have still got that sort of bubble of where they were children and how it impacted on them, following them into adulthood, that we're talking about too.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, you know, so many of the people that this touches are adult children. And I expect, you know, we'll get into kind of your story in a little while too. But for a lot of us, it took us to adulthood to even realize that there was an issue, right? Or that we were affected.
Yeah.
And so, you know,
and that's partly because so often when we were children, and I'm sure we'll get into this, it's a real conflicting emotions with you. And I've often said, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this, is that I could love and hate my parent within the same day, within the same afternoon, within the same hour, in terms of what I was going through. And you don't want to talk about it, because a whole load of other things impact on that as well. And therefore, often it's only when you get to adulthood that you can find some space or some security in and confidence to be able to address some of those issues and work through them. And it's hard to work through a lot of this.
Yeah,
and continues to be.
And to comprehend that contradiction, right? Because when I was a child, I thought if I was upset with the way that my dad drank, then it meant that I didn't love him that much, right? So I didn't allow myself a lot of those emotions, and I think that's true for a lot of people. But before we come to that, when was how did you find out about was you part of the start of the group, the all-party parliamentary group, or was it something that you saw? We spoke to Jonathan Ashworth, and he sort of came in because he saw somebody else speak about. Were you there from the beginning, or was it something that you came across?
What happened was, before the all-party group was established, I had actually been doing, I was being interviewed. So I am going to be 60 in September. So this is 15 years ago. And I was being interviewed by someone for the Observer magazine, actually. And completely out of the blue, during the course of the interview, the journalist, it was a woman journalist, said to me, "How does it feel to reach the age that your mum died?" Because my mother died at 45.
Wow.
And it was my mum who was an alcoholic. And I can honestly, first of all, I just started crying, and I had to stop the interview and had to go away and try and compose myself as best I could. But it was just so sort of like difficult. And I came back, wiped my eyes and everything. And I don't know, I said something, just something. Yeah. But I came away from that. And in the years before that, and, when I became an MP in 1997, and that was sort of 10 years before that interview, occasionally I talked about it, but I would have to be honest to say that I didn't feel confident about talking about it. I thought I would be judged, even within my own party, about my experience. And I mean, added on to that, my mum had me at 17 as a single parent. So I was like, I know it sounds weird today, but even then I was thinking, I don't want that to be known necessarily more widely. There are other family members I have to think about here, siblings, and then and so it was a lot, but it informed me in terms of my approach to things and my understanding about things, but I didn't feel very confident about talking about it. And I had another experience by the media a few years before, when, again, without even contacting me, a journalist, again, not from a tabloid, from a broadsheet, did a piece about me. And I can't remember whether it was when I was public health minister or in another ministerial role, in which they actually went and got my mum's death certificate.
Wow.
As a public record, and printed in the newspaper that, a cause of her death was cirrhosis of the liver. And again, it was like, it made me retreat into myself. But when the interview with the Observer took place and I was asked that question, as I say, at the time, I kind of, sitting here right now, I'm trying to think what I said. I think I sort of winged it in some way. But I came away from it thinking, I have to control this story about my life, I don't want to be in the situation again where I am being outed by a journalist who doesn't really know me or really know anything about me, anything about my family, my mom, and what a whole load of complex issues there. I want to control my own story. So I think it was from that sort of time on, not in a sort of showy way, I would have to say. I didn't necessarily get up in Parliament the next day and say, I'm going to make a speech on all of this. But I did find in my own ways, a way that I felt comfortable with, that my family felt comfortable with, that I could be more open and talk about it. Because I think at the same time about this is that, like everybody else, but when you're in the public goldfish bowl, as I'm talking about these things, I'm working through a lot of things that I probably hadn't really worked through before, because I hadn't got to that point of talking about it. And I think through that process, I had, opened up about it. People became more aware about it. And then Liam Byrne and I think Jonathan Ashworth, a few years down the road now, decided to sort of form an all-party group and invited me to join and become an officer of the group. But, it's, I think like everything, these things are a journey really. And I've tried to influence in different ways opportunities to raise it, amongst a whole host of other things as well, because part of it is, it defines me, but it's not the only thing that defines who I am. And I think probably that was part of the reason for my uncertainty and lack of confidence when I first became an MP, because I was really worried, like I think a lot of us are in this situation, that everything about me would be defined by that, and it would be defined in a way that wasn't a positive way. And I think, that's something I've had to work through. And I'm sure that's something many other people watching this or who've been through this experience will understand. And I understand.
Yeah. And has that work been hard over those years? Because to go from that kind of, bursting out in tears when you were asked about it, to the video that, Nacoa shared this morning of you standing up in Parliament and speaking directly to Theresa May and saying, 2.6 million,
Yeah.
you say living with a problem drinker, and then you say very like, it's a really, I've seen that video before, but didn't really think about the power in it, I don't think, until I watched it back this morning. And you say, I was one of them. And it's very like, pride's probably the wrong word, but very owned, very, I was one of them. And this is why support is needed. There must have been a lot of work in the space in between those two things.
Yes. And I think, that sort of, I think, when I was younger, there's a lot of different things that, that make you the person you are. And, as I said, I was a illegitimate daughter, born in 1961. I was very lucky that my grandparents didn't force my mother to give me up. But I also know that it was something that wasn't really talked about. I only found out about that when I was 10 years old. And, it's then I found out that the person who I thought was my father was my adoptive father. He married my mum and adopted me. And in some senses, and coming from a working class background as well, there was a whole heap of things, plus my mother's alcoholism and how that developed, because that wasn't part of my early childhood. It was something that really became a problem as I entered into my sort of 12, 13-year-old person and self, which again was another issue in terms of I knew what my mum was like before she was an alcoholic. And I had really great memories of that. And therefore seeing what happened to her was hard too. But I think, in terms of your question, I think the more that I felt confident about myself and proud of what I achieved in life, the first person in my family to go to university, I never thought I'd become an MP when I joined the Labour Party. And I think, to be honest, I've pretty much done everything in my life on my own merit. And I take a pride in that. I never had a sort of, the bank of mum and dad. I never had anything that was like a network of people. And in many respects, even today, and in the past few years in the Labour Party, everything I've done, I think I've done on merit. And that's something that gives me pride. But also, I think I've been able to sort of reflect more on my experience and reflect more actually on my mum, who every single day I would think, sometimes there's just something that happens, reminds me of her. And I would love her to be here today, but I had to work through a lot of things about what could I have done? I was the eldest of three. What could I have done? Could I have done more? Going through that whole thing about guilt, about should I have sorted something out? When I was angry with her, was that the wrong thing to do? What was the right thing to do? And the truth is, it's working through all of that to the point where there is no right and wrong in this. The most important thing is you aren't to blame. I'm not to blame. The child Caroline is not to blame. The adult Caroline is not to blame. And I just think that's something that I, again, have had to work through. And I'm sure lots of other people in this situation have as well. And I think again, it's, it's complex. These things are complex, and understanding it's complex is almost helpful, because if it was easy, we'd solve all this and we wouldn't have children becoming adults with all the associated baggage and problems that living with an alcoholic brings with it. But working through it and understanding the complexity is actually an important part for me of recovery. And I don't know whether that's, I don't know whether that's a woman thing that I'd like to think about these things and the layers within it. But it's certainly helped me. So when I, get to stand up in Parliament, and speak, I think I'd got to the point where I felt I owned my own story, as I mentioned before. I felt confident about what I had done in my life, that this is part of what made me who I am. And in some ways, probably along the way, it caused problems for me. But also in other ways, it gave me huge strength that I got through it and got to where I was. And I'm always careful about saying that, because I don't think this is a competition about the survivors and those who come through it and seem to get on and are successful. But the same token, I think it's really important to have positive stories that share the complexity of this, but also the hope that with the right support and help and sharing, that everybody can hopefully find some way in which they can feel whatever success is, whatever that means. Whatever that means. Just knocked over my Celebrity Mastermind trophy. Whatever that means.
Don't worry.
Sorry about that. I just smashed my trophy. No, I haven't smashed it. I just knocked it over in my hands like that. But whatever that means, that it's possible. It's possible. Yeah. And sometimes when you're in the mix of all this, it's very dark and it doesn't always seem possible, but it is. And that's why Nacoa is so important, and why organizations like Nacoa have to exist, because, you know, there isn't always someone in your home or next door or even with your friendship group that you can sometimes have those conversations with to start that process.
Yeah. And I think that's the big thing. You know, that lacking as children that we lack when we're younger is somebody to help us comprehend what we were experiencing.
Yeah.
And ultimately, you know, what I've got from everything that you've just said there for me is that we sort of start to believe that we need to make sense of it all. But actually the freedom for me really came when I started to realize it doesn't make sense, because it's not something that I should have experienced when I was a child. So trying to sort of comprehend it, actually what you do is you just become more comfortable with the fact that you know, you hate and love your parent, and it's made, you know, it made me weak but made me strong, you know, all those kind of contradictions that are kind of there. And on any given day I lean more into the weakness than I do the strength. But can I find ways to, you know, I think the contradictions are there.
That's exactly it.
And so many people, by the way, are resonating. I didn't want to sort of interrupt you. Somebody has just quoted you on just knocked over my Mastermind trophy. A quote that we love to hear. Lots of people talk.
Don't hear that every day.
No, exactly. Particularly when it was genuinely accidental as well.
It was.
Before we come to the Mastermind stuff and to a lot of the work that you're doing now, I'm not going to go through and read out. A lot of people are resonating with a lot that you've said, and the comments stay up on Facebook as well. So they'll be well worth you catching up with. You talked about how your mum was originally in your first, say, 12 years of your life. What was your relationship like with your mum then? She was a young woman, 17 when you were born, right? How was your life then?
Well, I mean, you know, I was, you know, I had a very happy childhood, you know, those years. I mean, my mum, I should say as well, my grandparents were publicans. So the first few years of my life, I was brought up in a pub in Twickenham. I think it's a gastro pub now. I think it's something called the Goat and something, but it used to be called the Jolly Blacksmith in Fulwell in Twickenham, near the bus garage. And my grandparents were originally from the north of England, and somehow or another they'd you know, worked their way. They ran a pub in Leeds, and then they moved south. And so the first few years of my life, which I don't really have a huge amount of memory of, but you know, I can remember snatches of it. I was there, and then when I was about 2.5, my mum married, and we lived, you know, and then the guy she married, I always, you know, assumed was my father, you know, and we, it was a happy childhood. He worked for what was, at the days when you used to rent a TV, he worked for DER Rentals. We lived in Clapham Junction above the DER shop. And then we moved back to Twickenham, and we lived 6 doors down or something like that from his mum. And it was one of those sort of like, you know, you know, you had relatives pretty nearby, and your neighbors were all your aunties and uncles as well, and all this sort of thing. And it was a happy life. I enjoyed school. I used to go, you know, I like ballet and tap and all those things. I was in the Brownies and all of that. And it was, I had a really good relationship with my mom. She was beautiful. I mean, I think the other thing is, again, at the time, I didn't realize how young she was. Because she's just like an adult, you know, and you don't have that sort of sense of age. But, you know, by the time she was 25, she had 3 children, you know, and she was beautiful. She was outgoing. She was an incredibly kind person. And that's who I saw. I mean, when we were in primary school, sometimes she, you know, as it was the 60s sort of thing, sometimes she used to drop us off at school as a brunette and pick us up in the afternoon in a blonde wig. I mean, you know, it was like, you know, she had a sense of fun and humor. There is no doubt about that. I think so it was, and we had holidays at Hailing Island, caravan holidays, that sort of thing. You know, again, you know, at home. And certainly in the early part of, you know, that childhood, it wasn't that we weren't aware of drink. I mean, my grandparents, you know, were publicans. They then went on to manage a newsagents in Wandsworth. And before they went back up north when they retired. But, you know, mum and dad, they'd probably go out for a drink on the Friday night. Nanny Flint would babysit. They might go out for a drink Sunday lunchtime, but it wasn't like there was a huge amount of drink. And in those early days as well, in that first sort of decade of my life, you know, if my mum drank half a lager, I mean, that, you know what I mean? That would be what she would drink, you know? So it was never an issue. And I think the thing is, I think what happened and what really changed is that her and her husband, my dad, decided to become publicans as well. We spent, we must have spent 18 months to 2 years as they did their training, moving from one pub to another, in the sort of locality of where we were at school, but it was like in Twickenham and Richmond, in Barnes, moving, running, managing pubs, you know, as they learnt their training before they got a pub of their own. And then I think, you know, I'm not saying it was necessarily the pub itself, but certainly drinking became more of an issue. And that was tied in with their relationship breakdown. And then it got harder, and then it got harder. My mum met someone else. She took us with them. That didn't work out. And the drinking became worse and worse. And really, I think what I sort of take from all of this, and where we then ended up with my mum. We got a council flat. We were living in the council flat, and it just got worse and worse until the point when I was 27, 28, and she died at the age of 45. And we went through, you know, a whole process then of Alcoholics Anonymous, everything else, and nothing seemed to work. But what I think I sort of knew then, but I don't think I could articulate it when I was like 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, is there was a whole heap of things I think about my mom and her vulnerability and her low self-esteem of not succeeding in these relationships that I think was a huge part to play in all this. And I think, again, when my grandparents went back up to the north of England, my mum, all her other relatives were in the north of England, and she was much more sort of isolated within London. And I think, again, the importance of having people around you who, you know, are your family, I think is so important in all this, and I think, you know, some of the conversations I've had with relatives, they sort of were aware, but not really aware, because mum was very good at, even when she was drinking sometimes, just being that, you know, lovely person, basically. And she could, you know, she could talk a good talk, you know, on things. We know that, you know, alcoholics, they can hide stuff, and they can, you know, she worked for a lot, you know, she worked for a lot of the time throughout all this, you know, as well. Everyone, you know, she was a nice person. Everybody thought she was a nice person. but also they didn't really even, and maybe some of them didn't want to know. Maybe that was too much as well. But it was something that was a big secret in different ways, in which we all in different ways tried to hide for lots of different reasons, and cover up and deal with in our own way. And sometimes that was days that was successful, some days that wasn't successful.
When do you remember when you started becoming aware that it was perhaps a problem?
Oh, I think when we were in a pub, and I think when there was a lot of sort of more late night drinking going on, and to be honest, some of the local police used to stay behind for a drink, in the, and some of that. And also I think as well, when I think mum's drinking habits changed to harder, from a lager to spirits, and more of that. I think that was a change. And then I think just, obviously, if someone's drinking a lot, there's a point at which, it physically overtakes them and they'll pass out or something, or they don't make sense. And then the other thing I think about it was when, when you start asking questions, and then she then's, trying to hide it. So there was lots of that going on in terms of hiding drink in different places, like the linen basket, sometimes the ironing basket, you'd find a bottle at the bottom of the ironing basket underneath all the clothes and things like that. And on other days, and then I think as it went on, it wasn't hidden anymore, but you started to get those things and happening, and you just became attuned to it. I mean, sometimes, as I say, it's sort of surreal in a way, because sometimes you'd be really aware that she'd been drinking, not to the point of passing out and everything, but she'd been drinking. And I'm talking about like in the middle of the day or something. And people would come round and they wouldn't be aware of it, but you're so tuned into it. And almost you're looking for everything then. And then you get in your head, am I just looking too much for everything now that's happening? Am I, is it real or isn't it? And actually it probably is real. And a few years ago, I was involved in a project that did some research around parents' awareness of what their children know about their drinking, but also spoke to children about what their idea about what their parents were drinking. And the interesting thing that came out of that piece of research was parents had no idea how much their kids were clued up. They had no idea. And the kids, even really young ones, 5-year-olds, 4-year-olds, in their own 4-year-old, 5-year-old way, could articulate what they were seeing, what was happening. So they say, every Saturday morning, mummy's feeling really ill. That's because of the hangover, And again, this wasn't even a group of necessarily parents with children where the parent was defined as an alcoholic. This was just drinking, looking at drinking patterns, But I think, again, it's that sort of thing about adults not realizing, thinking they're hiding stuff, and actually children are really clued up to this, And it's why, as well, as when I was a member of Parliament, when I did some work around domestic violence, just getting the organisations, the police and others to understand that, when you're dealing with, say, a situation of domestic violence, or where you're dealing with someone who's an addict of one form or another, you can't just deal with the adults, because the children are witnessing all this and they're absorbing it all. And a solution can't be a solution that's just built around, the adults involved in these traumatic situations, because it won't work. And it also disavows the experience of those children and the impacts of them down the road as they grow up as well, and what they think is normal, or how it affects them in different ways. So it's and again, I think this is probably, I'm sure this is something that chimes with lots of people. You end up in this sort of quiet world where you don't really want to say much to people about anything that's going on. I mean, I never raised it with anybody at school at all.
Yeah.
At all.
Yeah.
And actually, I don't really think I had a serious conversation. I don't think I had a conversation with any adult family members because, again, I suppose in my mind was, why aren't they raising it with me?
Yeah. Yeah.
They're adults. Surely they know what's happening here. So if they're not raising it with me, maybe I'm not allowed to talk about it either.
Mm.
You know, so it's like, it's very difficult, isn't it, in this? And then, of course, you know, I don't know. I've sometimes said, you know, it on one level, it's, you know, easy to sort of have a picture that everything was always bad every single day. And the truth is, it wasn't like that either. You had sort of, I don't know, you know, you held on to those parts of the day or the parts of the week when things were great. And I honestly, sometimes a sort of gallows humor sometimes around it, you know, about what was going on.
Yeah. Well, you don't have a choice in some ways. You don't have a choice, right? You have to learn to enjoy those moments. Otherwise, you have none, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I think as well in that, and I've thought a lot about, you know, the gender difference going on here as well, you know, because I think, you know, at the point where, you know, again, my mum was as a single parent with us. She worked in pretty low paid jobs, you know, and then sometimes she was out of work. It's interesting, you know, listening to some other people's stories, you know, about this and their experiences, is particularly with sort of like, you know, some of my colleagues and their experience of their fathers, who were often in one level, high-powered business people who were drinking in that sort of environment where these men, almost like alpha males, do you know what I mean? Drinking, and because society thinks, oh, that's okay, that's what you do. My mum was not an alpha female. I think she carried a huge amount of sense of guilt and failure in terms of where she'd got to in her life, and there was no one really around to help her through that and get through that. And she did try a lot of different organizations, but they just didn't come through for her. And I'm not blaming those organizations, but there wasn't really something that really addressed what I fundamentally think was the issue, was a whole heap of guilt and low self-esteem that probably went back quite a long way in her life. She had two brothers, one who died very young, and he was idolized as this, you know, saint. I mean, I never met him. My mum was 3 when he died. He was a lot older than her. And another older brother who was quite, you know, good at everything. And Wendy was this young girl, you know, who, you know, had all that to sort of live up to, I think. So again, it doesn't excuse some of the things my mother did and alcohol's impact on her, but it's certainly, I can understand more about what it is where women turn to drink and what is going on there, and whether there are any issues there in terms of gender and what goes on and the different attitudes. I mean, I don't know, Josh, what you think, but I often sort of see in the public domain men who are alcoholics who then talk about it, and that's great, but they're quite often these alpha men. And they get a lot of publicity, and, you know, but I don't hear many women often who talk about it. Maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but that's my sort of perception in this. I don't know.
Yeah, I think there is a way of, like, I certainly know for me, when I used to drink in the way that I did, and I would take my kids in the pub and get heavily drunk, and it was never really seen as strange. Yeah. I do think, I mean, to go on the conversation, you know, of the gender thing, I think people find it much easier to create a crazy lady in their head than they do to create a crazy man. He's just a good, strong, works hard, plays hard, etc., etc., etc. I do think people find it much easier to create the kind of crazy lady. And also in the societal structures that I guess that we've existed in, right? Even for me, when I was drinking, and this is only 10 years ago, I could do what I did, and there was always someone at home looking after the kids.
Yeah.
The woman is often, generally, broadly speaking, the one that's looking after the kids, right?
Yeah.
And so there's another heap of shame there where there's a layer behind me. There's a protective layer behind me as somebody who has a drink problem.
Yeah.
There often isn't with women. And of course, I'm sort of generalizing here in everything that I say, of course. But I do think there's something in there,
Yeah. I think there needs to be more done in this area. I think I'd like to see more work done in this area, because I think there is that. And the thing about the children thing is that obviously the fear that the children will be taken away.
Exactly that.
And that's again, and again, that's another aspect for the children in this, because, you're weighing up what, where am I best to be, in all of this. And despite everything that's really hard and sometimes a nightmare about the situation you're going through, being taken away, or possibly, your siblings being broken up from you, is just, no, rather stick and manage what you know than open that door to something you don't know, and the consequences, let's be honest about it, for a number of children that are looked after are not always that great either.
No, exactly. And I think one of the problems is the ways in which we look at addiction. You talked a little bit about your mum and some of the things that you thought that perhaps her drinking was a reaction to. We still, deep down in our core, most of us have a perception that addiction is something that just happens when we do something so much that we lose control over it. I actually think most drinkers, and perhaps it's similar in your mum's case, you're actually trying to gain control in the way in which you drink. That's exactly, it's an attempt at a solution rather than the problem itself. And I think we still believe that the solution is to just stop the drinking. And actually that just takes the solution away from someone and leaves them with the problem. And I think until we start to see addiction more like that, but actually not just talk about seeing it like that, but actually seeing it like that, as realizing this is somebody trying to gain some control in their life, then we have to start at the benefit that somebody like, look, your mum was an amazing woman to be able to raise children like she did at the age of 17, right? Something somewhere along the line, she doesn't just lose control for no reason, right? If that's what you want to say. Something happened, and I think that's where we need to look at, which is why this is even Nacoa work, even in itself, for me, is prevention work. Because if you can work with children, young children, then you may actually solve that problem for them before they start to try and solve it themselves with something like alcohol. I
think that's right, and these things don't just happen overnight. You said about what was the point where you were aware of this, and it's, in hindsight, it's quite, on one level, and in hindsight, you look back and think, actually, I didn't really pick up on that so much, but maybe that was part of that. But certainly that's, it was a sort of steady sort of thing where drink became much more involved, and the types of drink that were being consumed. But I think, again, sometimes it was about building confidence. Sometimes it was about blotting things out. And actually, depending on, the week or whatever, and, where she had to be and what she had to do, drink became a way to deal with that and use it in those different ways, it
becomes a solution for everything.
Oh God, yeah. And I honestly, she did in different ways use different agencies to try and stop, and she had periods when she stopped. I have a diary of hers when I was pregnant with my first child, where she'd actually was marking days, and it was only a couple of years ago, for something else, that I was looking through this diary, and I suddenly realized what those marks meant. She was counting the days that she hadn't had a drink.
She was trying,
and she was really, really trying, and you know, and I think there was like, I don't know, I think it was like 86 days or whatever it was, I don't know. But I mean, it was just like, and she didn't succeed, but she was trying, you know, she really was trying. And she knew how important it was to me, because she was there at the birth of my first child, and she had a lapse, and then she sorted herself out, and she was sober for that, you know. And and despite everything else, you know, that happened before and happened after that, you know, I can look at the photos and see my mum with me at the birth of my son, and that is special, and I'm glad I've got that. I mean, that is something that, you know, and I think she was really proud of doing that, you know, as well. So, and it's, you know, so she was trying. She did try. And it's so sad that she couldn't make it through. And, you know, and unfortunately, the ravages of alcohol was too much for her body to take.
Yeah. And it's interesting just to read this. Hillary, you know, Hillary, the CEO, says that Nacoa research shows that mum drinking can be even more damaging for children than both parents drinking. Wow. So it just shows you, the research is obviously there. Let me just read a couple of these. Kerry has said, I relate to the way you talk with love for your mum while still being so affected. Yeah. And what strength it takes every time they get sober, even for a few days. Yeah. So it's, and Hussein has said, you're so right. Drink and drugs are an attempt at a solution. And I think it's to be able to kind of see that it's quite a sort of deep conversation. So as you moved into your adulthood, what's your relationship with alcohol like, by the way? Do you drink? Or?
Yes, no, I do drink, but I have a rule. I never drink on my own.
Right.
And again, I think part of it was I didn't want to be in a situation. Maybe one of it was that I didn't want to be that sort of secret drinker, you know, on my own. Maybe there was something about it concerned that, you know, if that became a ritual, where it might lead to. But it's just been my sort of rule, really, that's I don't do that. So, you know, I will have, you know, glass of wine with my husband, or go out with friends. But if my husband's not in the house and I'm on my own, or when I've been in London, I would never drink on my own. It's just that's my sort of rule, I suppose. So yeah, I mean, that's another example, I think, is how it's sort of, you know, affected me. I don't want to be that person hiding it, and maybe there's also something a bit worried about how much I might drink if I started on my own, and understanding your moods and things like this, and how you can reach out for alcohol. I suppose that's the best way I can sort of, you know, I have a healthy relationship, but I also have a relationship with alcohol that is cautionary as well.
Yeah.
So have that rule, you know, is, I suppose, part of that, I suppose.
Yeah, and it's just a boundary, right?
Yeah.
Which all healthy relationships have boundaries that we're aware of, right? Yeah. And I think, you know, I think everyone would do well to talk a little bit more about their relationship with alcohol, rather than it being this binary thing of either it's a problem or it's not, right? If we have a relationship that we're open and aware of, then we're much less likely to have problems of it. What do you think needs to be done as we sort of like look at the landscape of where we are now and the support that's there for children? Do you have an idea of where we go next? Is there more to do?
I think what sort of over the years, which is, you know, it is about, you know, where children are, how they're brought up, how, you know, the sort of negative things around what adults do come into their lives. I mean, it is about alcohol, but there's a whole host of other things as well. But what I find, you know, I suppose what I found quite frustrating and annoying over the years is that there's been lots of schemes. If I look back over the sort of 22 years I was an MP, there's been lots of different family intervention programs, you know, We had Sure Start, obviously, that's another example. But, we've had the Troubled Children's Programme. There's always been these different programs. Okay. And then partly because of politics and the way it is, they then all get rebranded and called something new, and what is difficult about that, I sort of understand that, because when you get a new government, they want to rebrand everything, even though effectively they're trying to solve the same issues around children in need, resilience of children, helping children to thrive, supporting families, supporting parenting. And that's not easy. There's no such thing as a perfect parent. But the problem is that to get the sort of right support, you do need some sort of stability in all this. It's not that saying that everything we should do today around supporting children should be the same as it was 20, 30 years ago. But there are certain basics that are really important for children, I think. One is about, enabling their parents and others to help them to thrive, for their needs that they need emotionally and physically. But also, I think, we know what happens when children are in a situation that is traumatic, whether that's alcohol, drugs, domestic violence. We know the problems in all those situations, just like we've been talking about, not talking about the alcohol in our lives as children by the adults who are there to look after us. There's probably there are children every day where domestic violence is going on, and that's the secret that they're keeping as well, and other things too. So what is frustrating for me is that there's new research, new ideas, and that's really important. But you have to have the stability of the platform of services to be able to grow and evolve and change and become more inclusive as well. I think that's really important in all of this as well. And that doesn't happen where we keep chopping and changing all the time. And, you give with one hand, you take with another. We decide to change the names of everything. How hard is it? How hard is it for a family, for a mum seeking help when every time things keep changing and get rebranded? How hard is it for a child to reach out and ask for support if some of those things keep changing all the time, because that's just the way it is? And I'm not saying it's easy, but I just wish that we just, had some sort of real sense that good ideas could be allowed to flourish and grow. And instead of them becoming the exception to the rule, the very best practice is available as much as possible for everyone. And I think one of the things we did do research on in the all-party group was when we looked at, local authorities, which local authorities had any plan within their children's services for children of alcoholics. And we found that very few had. It wasn't really considered in the way that we've been discussing today. It wasn't in the mix. And also how patchy, even where there were services. And there's some really good work happening in the country. I think it's really important to be positive about. There's some really good work being done. There's really good research. There's good work in practice happening and supporting children and the whole family. But too often, how we spread that good practice is the hardest thing. And I think that's what's frustrating here. And the truth is, it takes a long time to enable, whether it's being done by a local authority, the voluntary sector like Nacoa, or even private sector involvement in this. It takes a while to establish these sort of services and establish the support and to enable it to grow. And the other, I think, aspect of this too is that what happens when, you come under the, if you like, the children's services arc of this, and then you become a young adult. How do the services overlap with each other? And I think, again, sometimes, you might get some good support as a child and then somehow find that you're more isolated when you become that sort of young adult and even an older adult in terms of being able to reach out for the services you want. So I think these are, I've always been a sort of try to be a cup half full person, and I am. It's what I find frustrating is the chopping and changing and and the lack of really sort of enabling some of the best practice to become the norm rather than the exception.
Yeah, no, which and Piers has just said in the chat that sadly the government has dropped all services within their strategy for children of alcoholics, which is why when you look at Nacoa's existed for sort of 30 years, and to be like a central consistent hub, and then look at what Nacoa's been able to do in terms of remaining as that kind of central hub, that where children get the opportunity to speak to a helpline counsellor without feeling like they've broken that code of secret in which most of them exist in. I think it's baffling and upsetting that we exist in a time where funding has been completely cut for that, right? Because that structure that you talk about is there. It's there,
And it's inexplicable, really, because I mean, look, we've gone through this last year, and we all get, about obviously the pandemic and what we needed to do, that, whether it's ventilators, PPE, getting the vaccine up and running, what have you. But we also know that, for some people, and some families, dare I say it, being able to work from home has been a great thing with children. I wouldn't want to over-egg it. I think, my sister-in-law was told by her son after a week of homeschooling that she was the worst teacher in the world. I mean, which was great vote of confidence for her. But some people, but for a lot of other people, we don't know yet just how damaging some of the impacts have been. And even this morning, listening on the radio, that there is already some evidence that for young children, their vocabulary skills have been affected, in that it's way too narrow for where they should be for their age, but have been affected by that lack of socialization that's gone on in the last year. But it seems that I was so shocked when I heard that, because I know choices have to be made. I know that. I've been a minister, but we're not talking about a huge amount of money here. But also if it was a good idea a few years ago when we were talking to, Jeremy Hunt, Matt Hancock and others, why is it no longer a good idea? That's the question I'd like to ask a politician. How could you only a few years ago, recognize how important this was? And now you're not saying we want to think about what are the services and have that conversation, because that's valid. Let's talk about the services and whether they're working. I think you should have that conversation. It's public money. We should all be accountable for how the money's spent. But I think to sort of take the money and it's not even going on to, another idea around this area that we're talking about today, that seems very short-sighted. And again, I suppose the older I get, I also know, and you have this sort of collective memory, is I always find it interesting today, and it makes me smile, is when I hear people talking about a new idea, and I think, no, that's not a new idea. It's just we had that idea. We had that idea 10 years ago. We had that idea 15 years ago. And then someone decided we didn't want to pursue that idea anymore.
Yeah.
So that was it. And here we are again. We're talking about it all over again, and that's my point about, family intervention programs. We all recognize that you do need some programs that are there to support families in coping with raising children, because it's not easy, and that families come in all shapes and sizes, and sometimes you have difficulties, and how do you support both the adults and children through that? That's going to be there forevermore. But I think it's really sad, because I think we made some real progress in a whole heap of issues that children face and need support on. We just managed, I think we found some space for this particular area of children of alcoholics that hadn't got the profile in the same way before in Parliament. And I think it's a real shame. And we could be, maybe we should arrange to meet and, I don't know, have this conversation again in 5 years' time, because, maybe I should put a bet on it. We'll probably be announcing that there's more money needed in this area. And you think, yeah, okay, thanks. You just took the money 5 years before.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And we just had somebody say that they're moving to Doncaster so they can vote for you at the next election.
Oh, well, well. My husband's standing for the council. Move now. No, you can't. You won't be able to vote anyway. He's up for election next week.
Oh, wow. For the people that are there, I'm sure they will know which way to vote now. Look, I want to give you an opportunity, not give you an opportunity. I also want to know about
talking about this.
The trophy. Just talk us through how this came about and how it happened.
So let me hold it all the time I'm talking now, because I haven't broken. You can see it's not broken. I literally, my hands knocked it over there. Wouldn't that have been tragic? I'm not sure, John.
If you'd have broke it at the beginning of this interview,
God,
I would have felt a sense of responsibility as well.
So I got a call at the beginning of last summer to see if I was interested in taking part in Celebrity Mastermind. And, last year was, it was not an easy year for all of us because of the pandemic, but also I'd lost my seat in the December, and that had been, to be honest, it'd been very traumatic in the lead up to that, with everything over Brexit, and really difficult. And actually it was difficult after that, because obviously in my area, it was an overwhelming leave area. I personally thought, and that was the decision, we should make the best of it. I knew it was going to be difficult, but it's like a weird situation that when I lost my seat, I can say it wasn't about what I did. It was really because of my party deciding to support, a stop Brexit, people's vote. But there we are. But the weird thing about it was afterwards was how many people who then didn't vote for me say to me, we really like you, but we couldn't vote for Labour, which again was a bittersweet experience. So I have to say, when it came to the pandemic shutdown, it was almost a little bit of a weird comfort blanket, because I didn't feel I had to go out and see loads of people all the time and have all those conversations, because I live in Doncaster as well, where I represented. And sometimes when people are really nice to you, I don't know what you think about this, Josh, it's almost harder when people are being nice to you all the time.
Yeah.
Think, oh, for God's sake, please, you're just making me more upset.
Yeah.
And you're so kind and it's so lovely. And I don't want to say to anybody, please be nice to people. It's a really nice thing. But sometimes it can be a bit too much. So when this came up, I was thinking, oh my God, it'd be nice to focus on something else. And actually it's for a good cause, because we could all nominate a charity. So and for me, I thought, actually, Nacoa would be the charity I'd want to support. I didn't realize, to be honest, at the time, that no one had ever, been on one of these programs and had Nacoa as a charity. So that was a bit of a surprise as well, sort of thing, and a nice surprise too. And hopefully many other celebrities will follow if you're watching Nacoa when you go on Pointless Celebrities or anything else, or The Chase or something like that. But I had to choose a subject, and I am a big film fan. And maybe that's another thing. Growing up as a child, I loved the movies. I could escape into a movie, to be honest. I loved it. And I think that's again stuck with me throughout my life. But so I was trying to think about a movie, and I was trying to think about a movie where there wasn't a cast of thousands, and an Alien is one of those. Like, I love all the Sigourney Weaver. I joined the Labour Party in 1979, the year that Margaret Thatcher got elected, but it was also the year that Alien came out. Sigourney Weaver as Ripley, and I said I was looking for a female role model, and along came Ripley. So I chose Alien, and they were happy about that, because you have to agree it with the program. And I spent July and August. It was almost like revising for an O-level or GCSE, as they nowadays. I've got them somewhere. I was reading stuff. I must have watched the movie, the theatrical release 79, a dozen times all over again, stopping and starting it, all this sort of thing. And then I had all these notes that I wrote down, just like when I was revising for exams back in the day. And then I did my thing as well, was then reduce my longhand notes to more like shorter notes. And then by the time we flew to Belfast to do the programme, because they film it there. And it was in September when restrictions were lifted a bit, but we still had to follow social distancing and everything. I had little cards, it's like trigger facts on it and things like this. Oh my God, the night before. And so, I'm obviously, as for people who watch the program, I was really pleased, did really well on my Alien round. there were a few on the general knowledge round where I was really annoyed with myself that I didn't get right. And I think I was just sort of like, you've got to keep in the zone the whole time. And at the end of it, I tied with Steve Backshaw, who was doing sharks, was his specialist subject. But because I hadn't had any passes, I'd won. And I did have that as a tactic. I did watch a few of the shows before I went on. And I said to my husband, I said, do you know what? If you pass, it can count against you at the end. So I'm just going to give an answer, whatever it is. And that's it. So that worked. But I then, the next day, when I flew back, I had the trophy, but obviously I couldn't tell anyone. So I told my husband, and I told my daughter, and I told my son, but nobody else. And then weirdly, this is like really bizarre. They told me they were going to show it in February, and then it didn't happen in February. Oh, every week I'm looking at the listing saying, how long can I go? Because lots of people knew I'd gone in it, but I couldn't tell anybody. But also the really weird thing, given we were in lockdown all of last year, the trophy itself, I kept in a box in a cupboard. I don't know why I did that, because nobody's visited us, our homes, for the last year. But maybe I thought it's like a really weird, mad thing to do. And I'm thinking, but maybe I thought if I put it out somewhere, well, maybe I thought I'd knock it over. I'd knock it over and break it, and that would be tragic. But also, maybe I thought I'd put it somewhere and I'd be doing like a selfie or a Zoom chat like this, and in the background I'd forgot, oh my god, I didn't put the Mastermind trophy away, everyone will know about it. Anyway, it was great. And there were, actually the other contestants are really lovely as well. And it was like we went to Manchester, flew to Belfast, flew back again. It was like my big mini adventure for 2020. And I think my husband was really, and my daughter in particular, they were really concerned for me, because it was a hard year last year, and I had to deal with a lot of issues around the election and then the pandemic. We lost a dear one in our family to COVID, and I think my husband was understandably worried about me either making a complete fool of myself. So when I actually won, I have to say it was great. And so thank you, Celebrity Mastermind. You were really helpful to me last year. And it was great. And it was great to, as I say, to do something for Nacoa and do something worthwhile. And I hope they use the money well. It's not a huge amount, but I hope it's helpful.
Well, it will be. But not just that. I think the fact that, it's announced as, I always go back, I've told this countless times, but as a child, I remember I used to see other kids that I lost my dad when I was 9, and I used to see people do stuff for charities, particularly like cancer charities and all that. And I used to think I'll never be able to do anything like that for my dad, because, what charity would I support? Nobody cares about an alcoholic, So to see where we are now, for me, it is huge, and it will be huge for a lot of people, and not like, not just the money, but it would have reached a certain audience that would have watched it as well. So
and as always, that's again what makes it so worthwhile as well, is that I know from Hillary and the others that the response is exactly that. People saying it's so, it's something really uplifting about someone who is on there talking about Nacoa and the charity and giving it that sort of publicity, but also seeing someone who is like them watching and listening. And maybe in a weird way as well, Josh, is when you do something like Celebrity Mastermind or Pointless Celebrities or something like that, it's just sort of, you're sharing it with an audience that if you were doing a program about just alcoholism may not tune into it.
Oh, absolutely.
So in its own sort of, on one level, relatively small way, you're reaching a wider group of people, and within that wider group of people, children of alcoholics.
Exactly.
Which is great. And again, people always sort of on Twitter and contact me and say thanks. It really made me nice to know that someone else has experienced this, and you're supporting action in this area, which is reward in itself.
Incredible. And it's sort of a nice way to kind of wrap up the stuff that we said. There is always one question I do like to ask, What if you could speak to, I'm going to say the 13-year-old you that was going through what she was, and you could have a conversation with her, what would you say to her now?
I think I would say, you know, it's not your fault. This is not, you can't control everything. This isn't your fault. That if someone offers you support, you know, as you grow older, hold on to that, take that. Because I think that's really important. And so, Caroline, you know, if someone holds out a hand and they want to give you some support, or they just want to listen, you know, take that hand and use it. You're not on your own. You're not on your own. And I think that's what I would say, because along the way, sometimes there weren't people there, but the person I am today is about the people in my life who've helped me. You know, they're not a football match, the crowd full of people, but they've helped me in different ways. And you've got to be open to having that support. And that's what I'd say to Caroline.
That's incredible. It's really, really powerful. And it will resonate with a lot of people. And I'm glad people will get to see you answer that in that way. Listen, I want to say like a massive thank you from, you know, for me personally, and I'm sure I sort of speak on behalf of everybody at Nacoa, what you've been able to do for us. And you've been like a real powerhouse at the front of what, you know, raising this awareness, not just the mastermind stuff, but, you know, that particularly standing up in Parliament in the way that you did, and, you know, turning that kind of really hard moment where you felt like you were outed by the journalist and going on. I'm thankful you went on that journey to be able to do what you've gone on to do for everybody that's been affected by parents drinking. And I hope you kind of recognize the reach and just how important it is. I really do hope that you recognize that, because I think it's really important. And just secondly, the other thing that I'd like to say is the way that you wear your story, I think offers a lot of hope for people, because it's not this real polarized, I got over it and I've come and so can you. It's just this real owning of, here's my story, here's the impacts it's had on me, and I'm here today being who I am. And I don't know if I've articulated that right, but that's what I find so powerful, particularly having spoke to you now for the last sort of hour and a bit, is just how you wear it. And I think that gives people hope and belief. And let me just read this one. Somebody said, "Wow, thank you for this, Josh and Caroline. I'm now 52 and rarely consider how I've been affected by being the child of an alcoholic, although I know it's massive. Great work by Nacoa. Wish you were there for me and my family 40 years ago." And that kind of, you know, that's huge, right? For somebody at 52 years old as well, to have those kind of realizations. So look, is there anything else you'd like to say before I take us off of the live?
No, it's been a pleasure being with you. I hope in the not too distant future we'll be able to actually meet in person again, which would be great. And you know, I'd like to say thank you to Nacoa, but also the people who've contacted me as well, because it's a two-way street, this. You know, I get something from this as well.
Yeah.
I get something from this as well, which helps me in terms of what I'm dealing with today, and what, you know, what we're all continue to deal with. And I've just I've got a post-it note on the wall above my computer, which I put up actually in the pandemic actually, and it's from a woman. I don't know who the woman is. It's an anonymous woman. It says, "I'm proud of the woman I am today because I went through one hell of a time becoming her." And I think, you know, again in this is you know, finding a way through. And you know, part of that actually, to be honest, is about laughter and fun and finding those moments without taking away all the other stuff that has been really difficult. And to the person, was it a woman or a man who's 52-year-old?
That's a woman. That's Tamara that said that.
Okay, so you know, again, what I would say is that, you know, it doesn't matter what age you are in which, you know, you think you want some support or help or what have you. There is no age barrier to working through this. It's not too late. It's not too late. And as a community, we're all there for each other.
Yeah, brilliant. Listen, this has been brilliant. Thanks for everybody that showed up. I would say go back and watch the comments, Caroline, if you get the opportunity, because there's been lots of stuff in there that I didn't have the opportunity to read out. Thanks to everyone that has watched this live and to the people that will watch it in the future. It's a goodbye from us.
Bye-bye.